An honor and a privilege to get to interview this amazing author about her debut novel. I think it's a beautiful and timely and incredibly important book that is going to have a ripple effect that I don't think that she's even close to understanding. So I'm excited to witness that. It's a story I've never read before, the perspective, the point of view, and it really reminded me of a story. I'm an English teacher, so it reminded me of a short story by Sandra Cisneros called 11. And in 11, this little girl is turning 11, and she talks about how she is every age she's ever been. She feels 9 and 7 and 6. And I feel like this book is the same, that we are all of the iterations of ourselves. We are every little girl we've grown up to be, every little boy, right? And somehow that makes us who we are. Our stories, although different in the sense that hers is fiction and mine is nonfiction, they are similar, and I think that's why I've been invited to talk with her today. Our stories are about little girls who don't have agency over themselves, over their own bodies, over their own choices, over their own circumstances, and they have to survive the people who do control them. And while reading this, I found myself relating to Sunny, the little girl, because she has transactional value in her worth. She is only worth what she can provide for the family. And I think, unfortunately, the story is timely in that sense as well, that there's a lot of people right now who might not feel like they have control over their bodies or agency over their identities. And so I think it's going to be a powerful book for a lot of people. So I'd like to introduce you all to Nanda, Reddy, and
Bridey, thank you so much. You guys, this is the kickoff. It's a soft launch because the book doesn't officially come out until Tuesday. And so this is my very first event. And I am just so grateful that you're all here. This is so exciting for me. It's just a kind of emotional moment, an emotional day, because it takes a lot to get a book out into the world. Like Bridey said, this book is about a girl, and things happen to her. It's a difficult book. I mean, it's a heavy book, but it is pretty fast-paced. But it's a story. A lot of you might know a little bit about the story. It's a story about a woman. It starts out with the little girl is a woman who hid her identity and hid all of that from her family for her whole life, her whole adult life. And she is forced to come clean when her sister finds her. And so she has to she's just going to figure out how she's going to reveal this to her husband. This story of immigration and of changing identity and all the different iterations that she lived to her husband. And so the story interweaves the present and the past, and you spend a lot of time in the past with young Sunny so that you understand what she went through and why she ended up having to hide herself. I am going to read a little bit from the opening pages. This book, there are a lot of moments in this girl's life that get branded. I should probably read from my copy so I don't bend this branding copy. There are a lot of moments that get sort of branded on her brain. And those form the beginning of most of the different iterations she becomes. And this moment is one that older Maya is brand. She knows in that moment, she's never going to forget that moment. So I preface it so that you can enter this moment with me, with her. So Maya, Atlanta, Georgia. Some moments sear themselves onto your brain. Me standing by the kitchen sink, the dogwood flowering outside the window, this envelope in my trembling hands. They found me. The air thickens and sounds recede. The blue and red striped envelope is covered in foreign stamps and bears names I haven't heard in decades. My heart hammers, and buried memories stir as I turn it over. The flap is barely affixed, the glue having failed. Inside is a yellowed sheet of paper, thin and soft. Its rough edge hints at a former life in a school notebook. This is third world paper, with faint, weirdly spaced lines, a cockroachy stuck in a box for years smell. Dated over a month ago, the letter addresses someone dead. Dear Sonny, Ma passed last year, 23 May. She had to sugar, lost one eye, and infection in left foot, but cancer gets you. I try to find you, but I never reach you. Now cancer get me. The doctor found a lump in my breast a couple of months ago. My daughter in New York search at a government place and find this address for you. I pray it work because I'm scared the cancer is bad, and I hope to see you one more time. Plus the doctors say you should check for a gene. Sonny, I never believed the lies about you. Even Daddy accepts the truth now. But even if you can't forgive Daddy, please come see your dying sister. With love, Roshni. A long-distance telephone number, a website, and an email address sit below the signature. My eyes rove the lines again and again, but the words swim without quite sinking in, and sing-song Creole fills my ears. Ma pass, lump in her breast, check for a gene, dying sister. Time to go, boys! Dwayne's booming voice snaps me back to myself, and I resist an insane urge to bring the paper to my face and eat it, as if that could return us to the before world. But this letter has cleaved time. There will only be life after. I'll have to tell him, my husband, a man who's never heard the name Sonny, who's never heard of Roshni, who believes I don't know my mother or father, who knows me by only one name. He's on the upstairs landing turned place-based, talking to our boys, saying, backpacks together, TV off, toys away, unaware, the planet just tilted. I'll pause there. But that's the opening scene. And
This book is quite courageous. And as a memoir writer, there's a lot of courage in telling your own story, but I found myself blown away by Nanda's courage to tell this girl's story. And I wondered, you give such an intimate perspective on what this little girl is going through. And I know you've talked a little bit in some discussions about your inspiration for writing this story. But I did wonder, as I was reading it, what made you want to tell this particular story in this way with essentially a 12-year-old girl?
So when I got the idea, when I was inspired to write the story, it was just kind of a very specific moment in which I was mistaken for an Asian American person. I didn't correct the person. I didn't say, oh, I'm actually Indo-Caribbean and Indo-Guyanese. And the idea of a woman who hides her identity popped in my head. An Indo-Caribbean woman who kind of hides her identity just popped in my head and kind of stayed there. And at the time, I'd been writing other works, and none of them had protagonists that resembled me in any way. I grew up reading a lot, and I still read a lot, but there are no protagonists. Like there are no Indo-Guyanese Caribbean Indo-Guyanese protagonists in popular literature. And it was in that moment that I thought, oh, why not write a character that maybe resembles me to some degree? But what I really wanted to explore, just from that idea that popped in my head, was that idea of erasure that happens with immigration. When you immigrate, when you move, and even when you move as a little child like you did in your book, you often, to fit in, erase so much of yourself. You feel this pressure to fit in and with the language and just the way you are and the way you dress, etc. And so you begin a process of erasure. And I wanted to explore that and the way that feels on a visceral level. And I know what that feels like because I arrived as an immigrant at 9. Of course, different circumstances. I had papers, I had a whole family with me, a lot of support. But but I knew this character would go through a similar sort of erasure process, but on a heightened scale, because her circumstances would be different. Because in the end, she would almost erase herself completely and cut herself off from her past completely, which I did not do, but which she did.
Yeah. I mean, I can't wait until you read this book. It's so special. It's the title, A Girl Within a Girl Within a Girl. As I was reading it, it also felt to me like a girl within a woman within a girl. And the idea that she's forced to become a woman while she's still a girl, both in age and experience. And so I wonder a little bit if you feel this is what a lot of us go through, and kind of that experience of having all these kind of, having to be a woman maybe before we're ready, or being treated like a girl when we are a woman, right?
Yeah, so I think specifically with immigration and immigrants, there is that sense of like your childhood ends when you're thrust into, and of course that happens at around that time when childhood ends anyway for her. When you're thrust into this world where you're suddenly expected to be this kind of model minority, and like, oh, all that play, that's over. You've got to you've got to shape up and do this, and you got to study, and here's the checklist, and so suddenly that happens with her. Like, she was the opening scene in Guyana. She's literally playing with dolls, and it's the last time she really gets to be a child, and she doesn't know that. And then her father announces what's about to happen, and she is forced into becoming like an adult, carrying this mantle for her family, like she's supposed to be the savior of them, this foot in the door in America. And so yes, she's forced to become an adult. But that happened to you too in your novel, even though it was totally different in your memoir, different circumstances, because your mother had expectations of you that were thrust upon you. And so and it was similar in this book. It's her family's expectations, and it was childhood's done, play is done. It is time for you to work for the family, and this is what you're expected to do.
And it's hard to unlearn things once you learn them, right? It's hard to unknow what you've known. And then when she goes back, she tries to be a kid in high school, even though she's not really that age. You just feel for this little girl so much. I wrote a memoir, and so it's firsthand, right? It's pretty easy. You just have to unpack all of your stuff. Well, that's not easy, but that's not easy. But you're still writing firsthand, so it's just what kind of clarity do you have, and how good is your memory? And but I was able to write things as I experienced or saw them, and I know that you wrote about things that you experienced firsthand to some extent, like coming here, right, with your family. But I wondered how you were able to write about things that you definitely, after we talked, I know you didn't have any experience with, like some of the more serious topics that are in the book, like trafficking, right? And that's pretty, when I say this is a brave writer, that's really brave to take on, to write about something that you don't know about. And so I wondered about like your research and your discovery process, and how you felt like you learned enough about that to be able to write about, this is the experience of some of these kids who come here. Yeah.
That's a really good question. And yes, this book does touch upon there are lots of, this is fiction, so everything that happens didn't happen to me. But it touches upon things that I definitely didn't experience. And, there's a website that as far as research goes, that I went to in YouTube. There's a YouTube channel. It's called Soft White Underbelly, and in it there are lots of firsthand accounts of people who have been trafficked, who've gone through some very difficult things, and they're very candid about their experiences, and you could follow their stories and to get into the headspace of what it feels like. Because in writing this book, a lot of this stuff started happening on the page. You kind of sort of lose control of where the plot's going. The character tells you where the plot's going, and these things started happening, and then you're in the emotion of it, or at least that's what I always explore as a writer. Is like, what does it feel like? And I put myself in that skin as much as I can, but then I want to clarify and make sure that is that really what it feels like. And so I visit those websites and kind of listen to these people's experiences. And I also read other people's memoirs, and that was all part of that research process to just make sure that I wasn't misrepresenting at any point any sort of experience. But at the end of the day, this is a unique fictional experience, and if I just hope it comes across as authentic and real and lived in. Like when you're in it with her, and to get there, really, I just kind of research that way. But
Yeah.
just try to put myself in her shoes, and these things just sort of happen.
Right. Well, and I think we all know that there's variations on a theme, right? And so this is not every story of coming here, but certainly it's a story. And you feel such a sense of sadness for this little girl, but man, she's a powerhouse too, which I think is the other aspect that, we as writers, again, I kind of knew where my story was going, but then to know that you're letting this little girl navigate her own story also to some extent is, again, very brave. Because the places you go in this book, I was like, whoa, okay, get ready for this little girl, and how is she going to come out of this? I think the timeliness, again, of this novel, it encompasses a lot of topics that are in the news right now. Again, that lack of agency and ownership over our bodies, our identities, and the choices that we sometimes have to make or are compelled to make because of lack of money or immigration status. And I at first wondered which one maybe did you think was most important, but I'm sure that they're all important. But I wonder, when you think about these topics that are now, you wrote this book at least a few years ago, and now all of a sudden it's all over the news. And it's on everybody's lips, these conversations. And so how do you feel in terms of the importance of what you actually have? You've kind of been a futurist here in thinking about what's coming out.
So, I mean, I think you're referring to the fact that she arrives without documents for sure. And there's, among other things that happen in the book, but that's kind of probably foremost. She, in deciding to have that be a major part of the book, that she arrives without documentation, I was wanting to convey the feeling, that emotion, that desperation people often feel in other countries to come to this land of milk and honey. And this story is set in the 80s when there was a mass exodus from Guyana, and my family arrived with papers, and my uncle sponsored us, etc. We were lucky that way. We had a place to live. We had this huge Caribbean community to embrace us, but still there was this sense of desperation to leave the country. Now that was unique because Guyana was a new democracy. It was 15 years old, post-colonial, and so to unpack that colonial history would be a different conversation. But it was there. As a child, there was this like sense everyone wants to leave, everyone needs to leave. This is a terrible place to be. This is a terrible place to live. We weren't at the time experiencing any war or like religious persecution or anything. It was an economic migration. And when we talk about immigration in this country right now, the hot button topic, we don't often like talk about people are like, why are they all coming? Why is but we don't get to that feeling, the sense, the emotion of it, what that actually feels like for a person. And again, when I write, and as I try to get into the skin and the feeling of it, like what does it feel like for this family? Why are they so desperate? So I wanted to show that. Why would they send their daughter and try to marry her off super early to try to get papers and all of that stuff? I try to show it through the like small, visceral, the feelings, little things that happen. And so that was partly why I made that choice. And I also wanted to like show that there's no dogma in this book. There's no one side or the other side. It's just showing you the story. I wanted to show a story where there was no war she was fleeing. There was no persecution, of course. And then when she's here, that becoming American happens, and there's a point where she could make the decision to turn herself in, and maybe things would go back and like be quote unquote better for her. But she's already Americanized, and I wanted you readers to understand what that feels like when you're in this place where that no longer is an option for you either, because you're so changed, like fundamentally changed, and so that happens to her. And
yeah, and I think like we were talking a little bit about this conversation, and we were talking about how there's just this incredible kind of empathy and understanding when people come from a country as refugees, where you come because there's war, you come, but what about just the story of coming here because of the white picket fence and the opportunity and all the things that are promised, right? And so I think that's an interesting experience because she isn't fleeing from something. She's kind of projected out, ejected from her family. And as a teacher, this is an experience that educators know well. I have students in my class, I've been teaching 25 years, and I have had many students who were sent here by their families from other countries. And I thought I knew, we don't tend to ask a lot of questions sometimes for fear of knowing the answer, getting the answer, I'm afraid. But I thought I knew when my girl said, "Oh, I'm living with an uncle." And then I read this book and it gives me chills thinking about it because some of them were smuggled in the back of trucks, and some of them were sent with all the money their family had. And all of them were sent with a promise of sending money home or bringing family over. And so this really has given me such an understanding and I cannot wait. I've already shared it with our state teachers union for that reason, that even though it's a novel, it is based on real events that our kids have gone through possibly, and we need to be aware of that. So again, I just applaud you for writing that story.
Thank you.
I really do. There's also this sense, another thing that teachers are aware of, and you probably know this too, it's called code switching, right? Where we switch our language. And in my classroom, I have kids who sometimes they speak English and sometimes they speak Spanish, and sometimes it's voy a leche, they're speaking Spanglish, right? And they're code switching. And there's an isolation a little bit when you are kind of trying to assimilate, and it can be awkward on a lot of levels. And so I was thinking about culture switching, right? We have code switching and then we have full culture switching. And although I didn't come from another country, although my home felt like it sometimes, but, and I only speak English really, I also had that urgency to assimilate every time I went to a new school. And I had a new language, or I had new manners, or I had new hairstyles, and I had to fit in, and it was isolating, and it was awkward, and it was scary. And I feel like you give her all of these opportunities with these different people. She's given a makeover by a girl who's a little bit older than her. She's taken in by a teacher who wants to kind of fix her. And so I just wonder a little bit about, that code switching and culture switching, and when you were writing about that, what you thought about that, and if you maybe went through that yourself a little bit when you got here.
Well, certainly code switching is just part of your arsenal and survival, and becomes just every day this thing you do when you're a brown person and or other in an obvious way, you're aware of that. And so that was definitely something I was exploring a little bit. But the culture switching and the code switching she goes through on all the micro levels, it's just, again, wanting to explore that erasing effect of assimilation, how that works, right? And just to show it in an emotional, very specific way here and there. It was what I employed to get that across. How does that work? What goes on in the brain? What is someone thinking about when this is being said? Or how are they reacting when that's being said? And but you're right. Everyone code switches to a certain degree. She's doing it on the scale that's up here because she's a fish out of water and she comes from a completely different culture, etc. But we all do that. We put on different, skin, different clothes, and put on our faces according to where we are. Right? We're different at work. We're different with our kids at home. And then there's that question of who are you really? Where is your true self, and what does that look like? And so there's a discovery process that happens for everyone. Teenagers go through that they're figuring it out, right? And so they do try on different clothes, and then sometimes they get really dressed up and they behave differently, and they realize that like on a literal level almost. But we don't often think about it because it's so seamless as we're growing up, right? And it's just part of growing up. And with her, it's doors open, doors close, and she is forced to do it in a way that you can't help but notice, and her name even changes with it, etc. So.
Yeah, and I thought it was so interesting because at first, the culture switching, she's kind of giving up power to all these different people who take it from her. And then she takes it, and then she owns it, and then it's hers. And so the culture that she finally assimilates to, I was asking Nanda, there's all these little girls that she plays kind of in this, all these different personalities. And I said, which one do you feel like is most her? And you said?
Her adult final personality, Maya, is, I would say, her true self, even though for most of her adult life she lied, and it's because she chose it.
Yeah.
It was the identity with which she had agency, and where she took control of her life, and she's like, this is who I am, this is who I want to be. Now for her, she did have to, and this book is a coming of age book on multiple levels when she's a young girl and again when she's an adult, because she has to come to terms with accepting all of those parts that she tried to completely shut away. She can still choose to be this person, but and accept, and be open about it, and that's where she has to get to by the end of the book.
Yeah, and I thought about that really with my story, because this is me, right? But I've kind of developed this reputation in my town as I'm a teacher, and I host these events, and I wear sequins, and I drove an ice cream truck, and then they're like, oh, but this is actually this book, all the stories in the book. And I thought, after you said that to me, that she chose Maya, that is who she is, and I chose this, right? I'm Miss Heidel, I'm the teacher, and I do great things for kids, but yet I'm still all these stories inside. I mean, I just think it's such a great opportunity for people to reflect too, when you just think about all the people you have and all the experiences you have, and it doesn't have to be negative, right? Or cause you to run to therapy, it's just an honoring of all those people, all those cultures within you. I also, again, as an English teacher, this little girl is given a role model in the book, this fabulous story, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. And it becomes the name she chooses is Maya, right, in her adult life. And I thought, what a beautiful message to give, that this little girl can find a role model in a book, in an author. And it's Maya Angelou's real life story, right? I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is her own memoir. And so this little girl can relate to her, especially the abuse, but also see how she kind of made it through. And I think that's a story that resonates with so many kids, right? I have kids that get lost in books and they find themselves in their books. And so I really love that. And I love that you gave Nina a role model. And I love that even though she had people around her, they didn't really get her, but this book got her.
Yeah, I mean, in Maya Angelou's, in that memoir, I know I'm Cage Birdson's, Maya goes through, there's all the horrific abuse, etc. that happens, and all the racism that's just so blatant, and at that time she was living. Then she moves to San Francisco, and she goes, and she's living with these homeless kids, and that's when she actually finds herself in this kind of, like, she's at the, what we would say probably bottom, rock bottom, but not really. She figured out then that she could choose who she wanted to be. Like, she could choose her future, and she was in charge. And she had this aha moment. And with Sunny, who becomes Maya in my book, she also has like a rock bottom kind of situation that's happening that at the same time gave her that space to choose who she wanted to become. She had a paradigm shift, and she's like, no, I'm in charge, and I'm the one in control here. And she figures it out, and then she figures out how to extract herself from that life. And
yeah, in essence, she's choosing, this little girl chooses the things that have been kind of thrust upon her, and she flips it and uses it to gain her own independence. It's brilliant. I mean, it's a playbook for, people who might feel like, and not necessarily even in this situation, but people who feel like they're stuck, and then taking kind of where you are and thinking, how can I use this to my advantage, and flipping her story right on its head. I mean, it's great, I think. I think as well, I was thinking about, as a teacher, we kind of measure kids' readiness when they grow up here or they come here, but we measure a lot of kids' readiness based on their language skills. And we give them all kinds of tests to see when they're ready for the next class or course. But I do think, again, the reason I suggested this to my union was that there's all these other levels of readiness that we should be considering, right? Language is important, but there's also the readiness of just being in a classroom and just knowing what's that like. There's a readiness of finding a group of people that you're safe around. There's a readiness of opening up and speaking in front of people and standing in front of people. And I think that, these moments that educators were all looking for a way to make a difference in our kids' lives. And I think that this is one of them. And we were talking yesterday about, as a teacher, I want to find every moment I can to give kids agency over their lives and their choices. And I can't always, because I like giving them tests. But when can I give them opportunities to have agency and to also tell their own stories, right? And to also open up for them. And I think that is really what you've done. And I think that there will be teachers who will be much better teachers because they read this book. Yeah, I mean that for sure. I wonder, you have found a niche kind of writing your own story, in the sense that you could write a character kind of who has a little bit of background that you do. And I think that's phenomenal. And you had said that you had written other things, but this felt like finally you've written a story that reflects you in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, this in many ways felt like the story I was born to write. This is the fourth novel I've written, but really the first one I worked really hard to publish. The others are sitting in the drawers. And part of that is you age and you think, oh gosh, I could potentially die and never have done this. But the other reason that this feels like the story I was born to write is because there are no stories out there that capture that emotion on that level of immigrating as a young girl that I've read, and having to erase yourself. And so I want to do that. And then there are no Indo-Caribbean, there are no Indo-Guyanese. I keep saying Caribbean. There are Indo-Caribbean protagonists, but no Indo-Guyanese protagonists. So this is the first one. A lot of people don't know where Guyana is, so I hope when they read this, they're curious about Guyana. And
I looked it up.
Yeah, and
Google it?
maybe that little bit of that colonial history. I mean, that colonial history is kind of marked the world, right? The British colonial history and the rest of it. But this is, I hope it makes people curious about that. And
And I also think there's you feature several deaf characters in the story as well, and I think that is it's another level of just representation. You know, that we are intersectional, right? We aren't just one thing. We have all these things going on, and so not only do you have this woman who's dealing with her own kind of secrets that she's hiding, but she's also got a deaf child that reminds her constantly of her sister who she left at home. And then her husband has a deaf sister who is another reminder of the secrets that she's been telling. And I wondered, you know, if there was what the purpose was really in including these deaf characters.
So I actually have a deaf sister. Again, this book is not autobiographical, I promise. But I have a deaf sister, and in that first scene in Guyana where she's walking with her deaf sister, she just appeared on the page. And I knew that she was going to have a deaf sister too. And it didn't bother me when I was writing it. I did think, I wonder if people will think I'm writing my sister. And it's not my sister at all. But I really wanted to include deaf representation, partly because I have a deaf sister. And that's another thing that's largely missing from mainstream literature. But also, you know, I wanted to show deaf culture in a positive light too. My sister didn't have hearing aids and all of that until we came to this country, and it's not been the most positive deaf environment for her because we were so ill-equipped as a family, and the culture at that time in the 80s was they were trying to teach you to like sound out words even if you're deaf. So I wanted to show kind of how how the deaf utopia might be. And so her family, she does the best that you can possibly do. They speak sign language regularly, etc. But that she just started on the page, and I thought, I know the deaf world a little from my sister. I speak a little sign language. I'm not fluent, and my sister okayed that.
Good.
She's it's not my sister.
And the sister in here, she has a great kind of outcome. I mean,
Yes.
other than her possible sickness, but she's having a great adult life.
Yes, and that was important too. That she had a but that would be giving away stuff.
Right.
So,
Yeah. It's so hard not to give it away. Wait till the last page. So I obviously I would just as I remember kind of being asked about my book, let me just say this. I picked up the book and barely put it down in a day and a half and just kept reading it, read it on the plane, read it as soon as I could get back to it. You just keep going. And although there are some heavy things in here, it's such a beautiful, uplifting story. And you're going to be cheering for this little girl, and you're going to be turning the page just waiting to see how she does it and how she flips this whole story on its head and comes out kind of stronger. And the very last page and the very beginning of the book just wrap it up so beautifully. And I can't wait till it comes out. You guys can get it. Oh, it's so great. But I wonder what you hope, readers, because I sent her like 18 pages of notes, just so you know. That's an English teacher for you. But I wonder what you hope we leave with as readers with your story?
You know, at the end of the day, this story is an identity story, right? It's a woman who has to figure out who she is as an adult, like has to come to her truth at the end of the story, and it's about literal identity. But I hope readers see themselves reflected in it, whether or not they're immigrants or not, because we all have versions of ourselves, and we all grapple with identity and who we are. And I feel like at the end of the day, that's why we read. We read books and novels, especially to sort of and memoirs to get into that like black box of the other person's mind. Like, how much do you really know another person, and how much do you really 100% know yourself if you're honest? And that exploration of self and identity is something that I think can happen on a different level as you're reading someone else's story, especially when you're reading a very distinct, specific story. It sometimes allows you, ironically, to see yourself completely. And I hope that happens for readers.
Well, I just, before we get into questions, just you're brave and amazing, and I'm so touched to be able to ask you some questions. Would anybody like to, we know that the book hasn't been available yet, but I'm sure some of you have had a peek, or maybe you're just curious about the writing process, what she went through to get all the publishing or something. It's great. Anybody want to ask questions? Yes.
I'm kind of curious about the sex trafficking thing, and how you came to empathize, sympathize, even have it in your consciousness for this.
So not sex trafficking so much as as trafficking. You know, like that word trafficking. You know, when I hear that word, when I wrote this book, I didn't think, oh, this is a book about trafficking or she's trafficked. And even as I was writing the stuff that was happening to her, it never, that word, that trafficking term never came up. But when we think of trafficking, we think of like these runaways or like kidnapped children and they're put in trucks and et cetera. That is not what's happening in this book.
Okay.
In this book, she's sent by her family to the United States to live with another family. I'm not giving too much away by saying this. To live with another family because they are given, they found this opportunity for her to do this, and just her, not anyone else in her family could do this. And they send her hoping that she can marry someone that the smuggler finds and then become legal and then send back for them. But obviously there's money exchange and she has no agency in the situation. And so that falls under that definition of being trafficked because she is taken from her house and smuggled. But she's not sent to be a sex worker or anything like that. Later on in the book, she does choose, and this is part of leaving that situation she was in, she does choose to work as a dancer at a club. And when that happens, that's actually not, it's an opportunity for her. She turns it into an opportunity for herself, and I don't. It's not that industry is not maligned in this book, and so it's. I'm not like it's not rose-colored lenses either, but it's. She chooses to do that then, and she's a little older at that point,
And that is a really powerful part because it's when she takes that sense of they've been using her kind of, even though she's not sex trafficked, she's definitely abused.
Mm-hmm.
But then she takes that. Yeah, she takes it and she's like, well, if you're gonna make me do these things and treat me this way, I'm gonna make money from it myself. And she gains some great independence from it. I thought it was a really, it was a way to kind of educate and give a different perspective to things that people might judge and not realize. That we're judging it.
Yeah, no, it's right.
Yeah. Again, that brave storytelling, kind of diving into areas where you're like, oh, you're going to go there.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's great.
Glad I cleared that up.
Yeah, I'm glad you cleared it up because, sorry to interject, but
No, please.
I guess thanks for allowing. I worked at the Department of Justice, and that's when I learned what that word meant.
Mhm.
But up until that time, I had a beautiful girlhood. So it's interesting when you see things that in your awareness that make you feel really good, and then you learn of things that make you feel really bad. And then you're present in this community with people and you want to be a force for good. Compassion is a big part of that,
Mhm.
but only the compassion that you're strong enough to carry after you've seen certain things. And when I learned what trafficking meant, it was like,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think it's good that you cleared that up
Uh-huh.
because I think many conscious, aware beings who are in positions of policy can maybe help create a lot of the great things you're talking about with the union or the school board. People only have so much capacity for so much shock to the system.
Mhm.
So, like, if there's a blurb about it in like a magazine, like, I just would be mindful of the words that are used.
I agree. I
So
think that immediately brings to mind kids thrown into a trap and
Yeah,
thrown
and
into a
some people
situation.
might think that that's, everyone might
Right.
not like that, but some people might not read the book just because of it.
I
Because
agree.
they're like,
Yeah, I agree.
they're just too exhausted.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, it's not the main theme at all. It's just kind of
I'd be into it.
Yeah, I think
It sounds fascinating.
what's a little probably palatable to people is that it is fiction too, right? It is fiction, and I think if you wanted to discover the real stories, you can watch, like you said, that website that you researched.
yeah.
But I think this gives people an out too, right? They can educate themselves, and they can also say, well, maybe it doesn't always happen like that. This is an experience for it.
and they tell a lot of
Yeah.
aides on Capitol Hill, like on the House and Senate side, they tell us, when we were there, you start with it sunny, you give the hard part in the middle, and you keep it sunny at the end. So even though some people might like it,
Yeah.
some people will ignore it,
Mhm.
is what I'm saying.
Yes. No.
Like, I
Absolutely.
wouldn't tug at emotions
Mhm.
unnecessarily.
Mhm.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah.
She's awesome in it. The little girl. The little girl and the way she handles her circumstance is so empowering. And you hope all girls, no matter the situation that they're in, or boys, whatever, anybody who's feeling defenseless, you wait for that moment. I was telling her, there are these choices that she makes as a writer when you don't want the things to happen to this girl, but you also, they happen, and it's an expectation, like you think but then because it happens, she gets to turn it around, and then you get to wait for that moment where she stands up to the bad guys and girls, right? That feels great, and that
Yeah.
give us that reward so we can get happy for her again. Yeah.
Yes.
How long did it take you to write this book? And then do you write by computer or do you do paper pencil?
So I write by computer. That's I computer. I use. Do you write? I use Scrivener.
Scribble.
I use Scrivener, the app.
Okay.
Because it lets you do scene by scene, which I really like that app. That software.
Yeah.
Technically, I started this book in 2020,
Okay.
and it took me maybe a year and a half to write the whole first draft, and then I did a bunch of beta reads. And actually, Erin was one of my beta readers. She read an early draft and gave me feedback on it, and I had 6 rounds of beta reads, like 4 beta readers, and they'd all give me back their feedback, and then I'd edit, and I did that a bunch, and so I guess that's all part of writing it. And so I got to that final draft maybe when I was ready to send it out to agents. I would say that was my final draft, although it was not this draft, because you edit with the agent, and then you edit with the editor. But that was 2023, so 3 years. But to write this book, I had to write because the long answer to that question is 20 years, because all those years of writing before and those novels in the drawers taught me how to write this book.
Yeah.
And so
it is a lot to birth a book into the world, that's for sure. Anybody writing, just keep writing. Just keep writing.
Yeah, do it. That's how you learn to do it too.
I have a
Anybody
question.
else? Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have, when you're writing, because it's such heavy topics, if you have an audience in mind when you're writing, or is it almost some level of catharsis for yourself, or is it kind of a mixture of both?
Right. So, I mean, again, heavy topics. The book is like, it does deal with themes that are heavy, but the pages are not like that necessarily. There is this girl going through this experience that then she has her life that, you know, she's in school and you're watching her in school, and she's she with her sister, and she's playing outside. You know, like she's not every page is like that. And so, but the way I write the scenes, I try to think about the emotion I'm trying to get across. That's how I write. I actually write what do I want the audience to feel at the top, and then I think of like, where is she? And I try to put myself in her body, and then I write it. And so for the very difficult scenes, because there are a few of those where it is hard to sit in the body, because things are happening and you're like, oh, those are hard. Those are hard. Those are days where you're like, you know, you're exhausted, and it looks, of course, like my kids are like, well, you didn't do anything. You were just sitting at a desk all day. But I mean, you're exhausted. You're spent.
It's the emotional connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. Anybody else have questions?
I have a question. I'm curious to say, like, you know, you're talking about code switching, culture switching, and how, like, for some people it's an issue of survival, and some people it's they take pleasure in it because they can move between different worlds, and some people hate it because they have to do it in order to make it in the world. Like, what insight you get on, like, from this character?
So I try, there's no dogma, and I don't try to like show it as a one, like it's good or bad, but it is what it is, right? I think code switching is just as a fact of life. I think you have to do it, right? And the amount you have to do it is based on how far off your personal, I guess, real self code is from the one that's accepted, right? I would imagine, or the one that's your home code versus the outside code. And so then that if it's really different and so drastic, then I guess there's a heaviness to it. But it is, you know, it's just a factor of the world not being homogeneous, right? We're a heterogeneous community and country and world, and even if we lived in a homogeneous community, like that looks somewhat homogeneous, like maybe you grew up in Alaska, and I would imagine a lot of people kind of look alike, more or less. You're still doing a sort of more micro code switching kind of thing, where you're not necessarily code switching, but a thing like that.
That culture switching, you become kind of an amalgamation of all the places that you've been, right? And all the iterations and all the personalities and all the language and all the conversations. And yeah, I remember being 11 and I moved from California back to Alaska, and I was a Valley girl. And so that was my code switching is, you know, and when I had gone from Alaska to California, everybody was like, oh, you had a pet polar bear and an igloo, and, you know, they code switch for you, right? They culture switch for you. But yeah, I remember being a Valley girl, and my name was actually Corey, your sister's name, but that was my Val name. And
Good one.
yeah. But I think there's such a strength in that too, right? I mean, I'm thinking about my students and all of their code switching, and that becomes kind of a really powerful tool they have when they get out into the world, and they can change very quickly. And this little girl is going to be a powerful adult, right? She changes very quickly, and she's intuitive, and she pays attention, And she knows by the time I'm sure she's an adult. I mean, if we were talking to her, she would know who's safe and who's not, and she would have kind of that instinctual awareness.
And learning to wield that is power and is part of developing agency in your world, right? And you have a lot less control of that when you're younger, and people's, I don't know, assumptions about you kind of make you feel a certain way. If you have some control of how the people changing people's perceptions based on switching code, that gives you power too, right? That's part of wielding it in the world a little bit.
Right. Yeah, I find really fascinating about talking about this, girl, which I'm really intrigued to read the book, obviously. But ultimately, the reason we code switch is because someone else is holding the power. So the people who are like the homogenous society, and like, for instance, like in all the village staffers that are been published in the New York Times, 80-90% of them are white males. So they probably don't need to code switch.
No.
Right.
Switch codes.
That's fair. Yeah, that's absolutely, yes, absolutely. And so, yeah. Yes. So does she have
That
power
is
at the
interesting.
end
She's
of
code
it?
switching because of the people who have the power,
Yes.
right?
Is that why you gave, well, I know you said you named her after Maya
Maya.
Angelou.
She chose it, yeah.
Oh, who
Well,
chose it?
yes, I chose
Oh,
it.
but
She
through
chose,
you.
she's such like a person.
Yeah, no, I did it. No. And I wonder, like, well, when you first read and you said the world switched or the universe switched, after, grab your two backpacks, put them together, and then Sunny thought that she felt like basically the switch in the dimension physically. I don't know, I'd say this to say that I like it, you listened to her and gave her the name Maya.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
that in and of itself is a code to the reader.
Yes. Well, she reads the book, and it's a powerful moment for her.
Yeah.
It teaches her, it's a powerful time for her when she reads the book, and that's part of
Like an awakening.
making the decision. It happens during a specific, yeah.
And it ties into that title too. I know why the caged bird sings, right? Because she's a caged bird. Her whole
Well,
upbringing,
She's actually
right?
infinite consciousness.
Right.
And so like a girl within a girl, if you think of those Russian magnets,
Yes.
it's kind of like beyond the stories we tell ourselves and the codes that come forth and flow. And it's beautiful to give the reader permission to see that and say, Maya, a dream, consciousness, no blame, but true sovereignty and authority.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I think that's a huge gift to give to the reader.
Thank you. That's such a gift.
Yay.
Thank you.
So much. That was so wonderful. And we have copies to buy up here, and I'm sure they'll be happy to sign. And anyway, congratulations again, and thank you.
Yay.